that is Ubijawa, that comes from native from Brazil. We will share this on social media because when you share from Zoom, things don't always go to plan. We will share it on social media and in sort of link it.
And it's important, Cass, to mention for those that perhaps are out or of the dinosaur paleontology. This dinosaur turned into a flag against colonialism. So this is Ubirajara, a fossil that was supposedly irregularly extracted from Brazil and has caused an uproar against colonial practices in paleontology.
Thank you, Eleni. That is very important. That's the reason we chose that dinosaur, because of the implications towards colonial practices, illegal specimens, and also because it prevents local children, local the indigenous population, and local researching studying what would have been, which is the world's first feathered dinosaur from the former Gondwana, which has only really been found previously within China. So it's a real amazing specimen that deserves to be within Brazil, and it does show, the effect that it does have within paleontology, that you are denying a future generation of access and interest into science. It's not just paleontology, but also into science. So thank you so much for everyone who's been able to attend. We have now come to the end of the meeting. For those who have to go, please feel free to drop off, but we will continue because I know there have been a number of questions, but if people do have to go, I completely understand. So thank you for coming, and please do follow us on social media. And please feel free to reach out to us and ask further questions. We'll give it a couple of minutes before we continue, but thanks again for attending, and have an amazing day, evening, depending on the part of the world you are from. Thank you, everyone. So we will continue in a couple of minutes because I do appreciate people did have to drop off, but there were a number of good questions. And we will get back to all of you who've typed questions in, as it were. It's a shame about the sound. Okay. Do any other audience have any other questions?
Cass, can I just hop in and say that I'm going to have to leave? But
that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, I'm now host, so that's not an issue.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot. Okay. Mr. Oh, go for it, Mr. Was it Zachariah?
Hello. I should change my name. So there was a question actually I saw earlier on, and which was asking that maybe we should look at undergraduate studies and consider reintroducing philosophy and ethics. And this is actually a pet peeve of mine, which I've been thinking about a lot, which is the question of philosophy within sciences. And I mean, all of us, when we graduate, I'm also busy with my PhD right now, so trying to get that through. Teaching and PhD never worked out, so I had to take a sabbatical. But one of the things I really thought about deeply is the idea that all of us, when we get our highest honor, we get a PhD, which is, Doctor of Philosophy. And I think, and I've been thinking about, I wonder when it happened within the history of the evolution of science. And this was actually sort of a paper to especially in my circle, to really look at when did the philosophy element of the sciences fall out, especially in the so-called physical sciences or natural sciences, because one of the things I've looked at when you look at a PhD thesis written by any student, most of us dive into the problem we're solving. We dive into all of the things. I mean, I call myself a climate crisis researcher. So I'm looking at research around climate mitigation. And so we're looking at trying to use rocks to draw down CO2. That's the core of my research. And one of the things is that, of course, I'm interested in the empirical work and doing experiments and whatnot. But as a scientist, I would imagine that when I'm done and I produce my thesis, the first page should be, at the very least, or the first chapter should be a philosophical engagement with the question of climate crisis. For example, scientists, even within my fraternity, geology, they have a different perspective about climate change, or in this case, I like to call it radical climate change, because climate has been changing for billions of years. But and different scientists have different perspectives about the climate crisis. And it will be interesting, as I write my PhD thesis and submit it, that the first page, the first chapter, should be a philosophical engagement with the question of climate crisis. What is my perspective? And again, going back to the aspect of engaging with one's subjectivity, which is, I would also be able to engage with my subjectivity in that. And I really do think one of the saddest things that has happened in the history of science education is that we have created this silo. And you see quite a lot of scientists also walking around with a bit of a chip on their shoulder when it comes to political science. Well, it's not really sciences, or life or other types of sciences out there that are not physical sciences are not. So if you can't put a number to it, or you can't put a standard deviation to it, it's not really science. And I really do think this is perhaps one of the reasons why we face such problems, that the philosophy aspect of science fell out somewhere. And you look at great scientists in the olden days, they were also engaging in multiple different streams of science. And in addition to that, they were also engaged with the humanities questions or the philosophical questions. And I think if we return the philosophy back into the sciences as a starting place, even for undergraduate students, and I'm doing that right now at my university, where I've introduced geoethics. No one in the department, when I did that in the department, they just thought I'm wasting my time. Why am I teaching geology students about geoethics? But we are facing quite a lot of crises in the country when it comes to mining companies stealing people's land and trying to extract minerals from it, and people are literally destitute. And at the vanguard of this is geologists who go out in search of minerals and find and show those wealthy billionaires where the minerals are. And the question is, should my students, when they leave, not only have their understanding of the science, but also an understanding of the ethics that are involved? So I call the subject geoethics, law, and power, to understand the dynamics. And most of our students in the sciences never engage about the ethics on politics and even other aspects in the so-called soft sciences. But yet it's a core of everything. I mean, when we all enter into a workspace, we enter into work politics, we enter into different philosophical perspective. If you go and work in a mine, you're definitely working for a hyper-capitalist entity whose main aim is to just produce profits. And yet your own values are put aside. You might very well be a Christian who believes in protecting the sanctity of the world, but yet you're engaged in practices that are sort of enter your own philosophy. So I think one of the things I would love to hear from you guys, which is how have we scientists engaged with our own philosophical standing in certain things, and really sometimes taking a position. I think even when it comes to climate change, there are some scientists who philosophically don't believe that climate change is a crisis. And it's interesting to always engage where that comes from. But somehow we always want to relegate that. But somehow when we write a paper, you find that you are steering towards disproving the need for us to, fight against climate change. So it's just a thought, or something I've been interested in actually looking at and going back through history and looking when science lost its sort of philosophical components.
Thanks for that. And I think it comes into what you sort of mentioned earlier, that there are political ramifications for going into philosophy of paleontology, of geology. There'll be issues raised about mining, issues to raise potentially to do with other larger corporations' actions, issues to do with maybe particular governments around the world, there are political ramifications for asking such questions. There may also be issues to do with funding for universities and institutions for asking such questions. And therefore, I think that is a whole topic in and of itself, but that may in part be why such questions are not necessarily asked very often. Alini, I've seen your hand on up.
First, I want to say you have a new fan, Mr. Nosif, because unbelievable. I was like totally in a way with your first speech, and now I think this is totally necessary. I'm a professor in the geology department here in Northeast Brazil. Now in my department, we have 39 male professors and 3 women. And it's really hard to approach some topics. For example, even paleontology, it's seen with prejudice here. It's something done by like the soft geologists and woman thing. It's something really hard. And talking about geoethics, it's something unbelievable. But what I'm trying to do, since we don't have this space to, for example, create a new course about it, it's taking some time in my paleontology course to talk exactly about that and use paleontology as a tool. For example, talking about decolonization, ethics in paleontology during my classes, that's the tool I have, right? Because again, with 39 males working with the practical side of geology here, it's impossible to see nearby change. So I'm trying to build change in small steps, for example, during my classes, promoting debates, promoting, evaluating the students, for example, during debates of ethics in paleontology. This is, it's incredible that the new generation wants to discuss that. It's the older generations that don't want to change the status quo because this privileges them. And they have privileged from, well, destroying almost everything and putting this legacy of climate change and destruction to us to solve. So I think what we can do, it's perhaps moving what we can as an individual. So guys, think up about including in your classes about whatever, some discussions about ethics, discussions about climate change. We have a lot of geoscientists, deniers of climate change. I don't know if there is the same thing, but here it's unbelievable. Almost the whole department is a denier of climate changes. I don't understand how that's possible, but well, I'm a biologist. I'm there as an outsider. So I have a different perspective, and I think different perspectives, diversity is always good. And that's it. Thank you very much. I'm like, you're a big fan now. If you have social media, please do share in the chat because I want to follow you.
Thanks, Alini. And I think both those points is a very important part that in anything in life, you can weave and illustrate a story. And I think we can use science to illustrate different stories. We can use science to illustrate the story of decolonization. So it doesn't always need to be apparent. We can weave these themes into research, into collaborations, and that way we can illustrate by action as well. Tafiya, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I would just like to mention one point, although I don't know, I mean, I don't have the exact details of exactly when this philosophical component started to, vanish from the general idea of science. But I think it's almost around the same time when the other practices, not so great practices, started to creep in the practice of science, such as hierarchical arrangement of which science is good and which science is not so good. It also started around the same time of extreme over-specialization. If you look back, there were people who were called naturalists, and they were addressing different kind of questions which are organically very interdisciplinary questions, and probably it's better to address by people who are generally interested. But now if you look at it, it's extreme over specialization, as if a priori you need to know who is going to solve the question and then try to solve the question, rather than sort of approach the question and then we go into different aspects of the question. So I guess it's sort of all these things started to happen together. I mean, just without mentioning or without overgeneralizing, I think I went to one of the medical doctors for some issues and he started asking, what do you do and stuff like that. So I very, not wanted to hurt him or anything. I simply said that, well, we share at least one common interest, and that's the study of evolution. And he looks at me and he says, no, I don't study that. I study medicine. Now, it may sound very weird, but that's what it boils down to. Most of the practitioners of science nowadays are very involved in the small technicalities, or exactly how do you perform or how do you run a particular experiment, rather than the overarching idea of becoming nurturing our scientific temper. And that's where philosophy plays in. I'm very proud. I mean, not always I feel so proud, but sometimes I feel proud that actually I'm from India, and in the constitution, in some of the goals, such as pursuit of happiness in other countries, one of the goals in the constitution is to nurture the scientific temper of its citizen. And that, I think, actually is extremely important thing. And that brings into this whole idea of philosophy. If we lose philosophy of science in the overall training, I think few years down the line, we will see that we will only have technicians of the technical person, but lost the sense of where we are heading and what are the really important questions. So sorry for ranting out a bit, but I just thought that this is a really important question, and thanks for noticing it and bringing it up.
Thanks, and thanks for that very useful insight and sort of explanation and sort of background, because it is a very poignant point and it does show sort of the evolution of things. Omar, would you like to raise your point?
Yeah, just because I have to leave very soon. So I just wanted to add something on what Nkosi very well said, because when I was an undergrad, one of the first classes I had as a biologist was philosophy and history of biology. And I just assumed that was something everyone learned everywhere in the world. Apparently it's not true. Many places here in Europe, they don't really read philosophy beyond high school. And something that teacher said back in the day is that we need to be very critical of the material we use for teaching. And he said, in 1999, there was this book called Consilience, The Unity of Knowledge, written by Edward Wilson, a famous scientific racist, who came up with the definition of science that says science is any knowledge that is testable, hierarchically organized, and can make predictions. And I can bet you that if you Google science in the Wikipedia, that would be the definition in many of the languages. Because it became the definition, it sounded like a nice simplification of what is science. But when you read the book, you realize that the whole point of that definition is to justify why European science is better than everywhere else in the world. And when you repeat that definition in your textbooks, people go and find the source of that, and you are encouraging people to go down a path of pseudo-radicalization of knowing that's what science. Recently, I've been organizing, I was invited to organize a roundtable for decolonization, and I wanted to invite people from the social sciences rather than only scientists, because I don't think scientists know what science is, because when you ask them what is the definition of science, they give you this definition that has become basically a textbook definition. And you cannot start teaching science if you don't know what science is. You cannot go in life being a PhD student repeating Wilson's definition of science. And that definition, I bet you, if you Google the science in Wikipedia in Spanish, in French, in English, Wilson's definition is the first sentence of what is science. And that is dangerous because you teach that to the next generation. They see the reference and they will go and see Wilson's legacy living on, even though we want to dismantle it. So be very critical of the teaching materials that you want to share. Like if you're in a teaching position, you have to do this work. It's easier to just take what has been done before and just recycle it, but be aware that it's dangerous. And I wanted to bring this point because I feel like the fact that the mere definition of science is racist should speak volumes of the other things you might be teaching that are also carrying this racist colonial legacy. And that is why it's very important that if you are engaging in science, in STEM, if you're engaging in social sciences, natural sciences, any kind of science, please do question, what is science? What am I doing? What is this? What is, when we say reality, what does that mean? You know, what does reality mean? What does measuring something objectively means? And I feel like when I was a young undergrad student, having a teacher telling me this marked my next 20 years of career. So it's very important that we're aware that what we teach needs to be selected critically. Everything, if we have that position of power, because teachers are powerful. If you are in the position of teaching, be very careful in what you teach and be very careful in how you say things. And I think that's what I wanted to end this, because I feel like we always forget that as academics, we all have to do teaching. And we often put teaching as a very soft, passive kind of tool, but it's actually very powerful. And that's why I always like to bring this science definition into the table. Because if you are asked to teach biology, chances are the slide number 1 in your module starts with that definition. And you're building the whole on that. And we really need to do better. We really need to do the critical thinking. We associate scientists as a stereotype. And it's a tool, it's something that you don't learn one night to the other. So I do encourage everyone to engage with philosophy and to question this teaching that you're doing, and try to, like Aline said, try to bring your teaching, like use teaching in your favor. It is not a soft power, it is very powerful, and it can change lives. It can change lives. It certainly changed mine when I was in Mexico. And before I leave, I just want to thank Cassius and everyone for this discussion. I think it's nice, and I'm always in a position of learning. And with Nkosi and Abiwe, I have learned a lot today, and I want to thank you for that. So I'll see you all hopefully next time, and have everyone a very good day.
Thanks, Emma, for that. Thanks a lot for attending and sharing your thoughts. Joshua, you
Yes.
have your hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, I would totally agree with Omar there. I'm an artist. I'm a paleo artist, and so my background is more in the arts, but still, probably some of my most important moments in my education were courses in which we discuss philosophical matters that bleed over into natural science, especially stuff like postmodernism, how we construct basically our world around us. There were several courses on how our brain works and things, and all these things, how our perception is based not only on our senses but also our beliefs and so on. And I feel like these things also shaped incredibly how I produce paleo art, for example, and I think that should be an important thing to teach young paleontologists and geologists, because paleontology it's one of these sciences where more than ever the questioning of your previous held beliefs is so important. I mean, I feel this every day, like a new discovery can change how we perceive deep time in the blink of an eye. And I think we should try to carry this more over into not only our practice of paleontology, but also how we interact with each other. And yeah, that's my 2 cents on that topic.
I want to comment on that. I need Cassius, please, because Joshua, you are extremely powerful. We as teacher, we have 40 students per year here, but you as an artist, you reach like thousands of people when you depict an organism, and this depiction is used to communicate science. So the way you depict the past influences in the way people understand the past. So if you use things that are maintained by the status quo and depict this in your art, you're maintaining the status quo, but you defy that. And I know you are defied all that and try to depict organisms in another way. So your art is an extremely powerful tool to promote change. And thank you for doing that. And thank you for example, not choosing the mainstream dinosaurs and organisms, for depicting organisms from the global south, for depicting, the results of papers from scientists from the global south, not only the global north and not only the mainstream things. This is very important. You can, through your art, as an artist, be a powerful tool in this fight. And thank you for being on our side. Thank you for choosing that. And just to comment on Omar, I think that I want to ask to my students in the beginning of the paleontology courses, for example, why are you doing science? This is really important. Most of them, they answer they are doing science because they want a better world, or they want to help people. Then I challenge them, how your science, how the science being done is doing that. For example, how supporting science per se, for example, the Ubirajara description, it was irregular in many ways, but it's science, so it should be available independently if it was based on a regular specimen and so on. But this is bad science because not because the quality, but because it's harming people. So if you're doing science to make the world better, to make the world better for people, think about if that is the science you want to. And asking students why you're doing science may confront them about thinking, well, what I'm doing, what other people are doing, it's good. That's what I expect from science. It's always a good starting point. And again, thank you, Joshua, for challenging the mainstream views always.
Thanks, Eleni. And that is a very, very important point. The representation and depictions of paleontology from different parts of the world, and that's why we will be doing more of a highlight going forward on our social media of fauna and taxa from the former Gondwana, as well as Eastern Eurasia, so parts of Asia as well, which often gets overlooked. So if you want to take part, please drop us a message, and we're more than happy to include your work. And on that point, Joshua, you had your hand up.
Yeah, sure. First off, thank you very much. I like to say that we paleo artists are like 90% of the PR of paleontology. And I think that's why we have such a strong obligation in changing the perception of paleontology at deep time for the public. One example I recently did, kind of out of spite, because I usually don't do that, 2 posters of your favorite dinosaurs. And I specifically try to make it non-US centric, because that's so easy to do, to just put in your T-Rex and Triceratops and Stegosaurus and blah, blah, blah. It's also all in there, but it's more stretched out over 2 posters, and there's still some stuff that is left where people are still whining at me for not including that yet. But I, for example, on the first poster, I immediately knew, okay, if I include ankylosaurs, I also need to have in there Stiguros, a new ankylosaur from Chile that was just described, because it's so beautiful and bizarre, and we need more people to know about this. So of course you draw in the people with your T-Rex and your Stegosaurs, but then you can also use that platform that this creates to introduce people to more obscure taxa, and therefore bring more attention to all these lost worlds of the global south that are equally fascinating to explore.
Thanks, Joshua. And I'll just shout out that I do have your book on Europasaurus, and I think it was great that you covered a taxa that's often overlooked, as well as an ecology that's often overlooked. So I thought that was really good. Great book, by the way. And Alexandra, I just saw your point, and there is a work in progress where that had just all feature for various reasons, but more about that going forward. And on that point about paleo art, this is a whole topic in and of itself, but paleo art has a massive impact, especially for children, because paleo art is often in children's book. And something that I was going to include at the beginning, but I think maybe now would be a better opportunity, is that in many children's books and many depictions, especially, I use dinosaurs because that is sort of those which are most visible in the public sphere. So it's not excluding other groups. I'm not saying they're not important, but it's what public and you know, are more familiar with. In many children's books, and this is only from like the 90s, so when I was growing up, you see many children's books where it say at the end of the Cretaceous, at the end of the Jurassic, sauropods became extinct, and they were replaced by hadrosaurs and ceratopsians. Now, even as a kid, I knew that was wrong, because in those same books, it would go on to say, in remote parts of the world, there was a discovery of a sauropod like Saltosaurus. But the language used and sort of the depictions, so we had Saltosaurus from South America, there's Nematosaurus from Mongolia, and there's Titanosaurus, then Titanosaurus from India, and even Argentinosaurus was also discovered. But the way that the whole, and it's still actually quite present now in many spheres, the whole narrative of almost what happened to the dinosaurs and sauropods are keystone taxa, so they're very key to the ecosystem. The whole narrative has removed sort of the importance of Gondwana and the eastern of Asia, because sauropods thrived there. They actually re-entered the north. So you remove that from the children's books, from the narratives, and people then think, okay, everything's from a very Anglosphere point of view about what's happened in America. Now, the situation in what happened in North America would be very different from the situation in the form of Gondwana. And therefore, the public and the perceptions of what is important, what's been investigated, what's been discovered, is very biased. And therefore, you're not just sort of distorting the story of what's going on and sort of eradicating the whole fauna and flora of a supercontinent. You also make people feel, oh, this part of the world isn't important. Oh, there's no fossils here. Or we can't be a paleontologist in this part of the world. And it was something I did want to highlight, that narrative is still going on. And I think it does come down to paleontologists, paleo artists, even filmmakers. I think Jurassic Park series, for those who want to point out its flaws and inaccuracy, is actually done quite well, especially as time's going on, as showing fauna or dinosaurs from other parts of the world. So Spinosaurus is from Africa, so that got a lot of sort of insight, make people became more aware of Spinosaurus. Before that, people weren't really aware. So it does show the impact that media has in many forms. Avery, you had your hand up, so I'll go over to you.
Sorry, I was just going to come in about the impact that paleo artists actually have. I mean, because I'm busy writing a children's book right now, and these whole illustrations and getting things right. And it dawned on me that while I was actually working with someone that most of, I'll make an example with, because I'm a paleobotanist, and how we are always reduced to fodder. So whether it is an image of a dinosaur, sometimes the picture itself is not clear about the actual plants that were there. So it's sort of like you disappear in the mist. Or also the fact that there's so many inaccuracies about the types of plants that were there at that time. So it's actually one of the things that I always encourage paleo artists to do, is to actually, if you're doing, for example, art about a dinosaur, for example, because I know dinosaurs are very popular. My book, by the way, is about plants, and superheroes about plants. So has nothing to do with dinosaurs. Maybe we'll kill a dinosaur here and there, but but I found that some paleo scientists, particularly, it's not even just paleo artists. Sorry, I mean, it's not even just in popular, articles or scientific. You see it also in scientific journals, where the actual depiction of species is incorrect. The actual timeline is incorrect. And so I always encourage paleo artists to not only, if you're doing reconstruction of a dinosaur from whichever period, and you don't know which plants occurred in that period or other species that occurred in that period, don't just add whatever it is that you think was in there. Because I mean, with the power that you have, one of the kids in my group was saying, I do a lot of community outreach, and one of the kids was saying, oh, but there weren't plants during this time. And I'm like, no, what makes you think that there weren't plants during the Triassic? It's like, but it's only dinosaurs that that dinosaurs are, the best thing and stuff. And it's like, you never see like a proper image of plants being shown and in the background and stuff. I'm like, well, that's what actually made me want to actually do this children's book. It's because I was like, oh, okay, so not only are we underrepresented as a plant scientist, but there is this this narrative that needs to change in the accuracy and collaboration that paleobotanists need to have with paleo scientists, just to make sure that things are done well, and not just to highlight whatever the dinosaur is. I'm sorry I'm picking on dinosaur people, but it's the reality that whatever dinosaur is in the forefront. But to just think in mind that, okay, we have this depiction, then is it really necessary to have the plants if they're going to be inaccurate? Okay, so yeah, just that's all I wanted to say. So yeah.
I agree. I am a dinosaur researcher, but I do agree with you. The depiction of plants and the ecology and the paleo environment is really important, and I think it also highlights the variability of the history of life on Earth. So by showing the backgrounds being accurate, by showing the different fauna, you start asking all these other sort of questions about the biogeography, the evolution of ecosystems, the change of successions. The spread of different species and plants, the impact that has on the fauna, and it's actually a whole sort of subject area that is often overlooked. So I completely agree with you. It's really important, and actually, at times, it's been quite challenging sometimes to find accurate sort of information, and often it's actually behind paywalls of fauna from, for example, from the form of Gondwana, because a lot of books don't actually go into it. So it's a really important message. And I think one of the really cool things about plants is that in some ways, you know, the sort of the environment of Southern South America today has that very sort of Mesozoic Gondwana feel. And that's something which is really amazing, because you look at the pictures, and I haven't been fortunate enough to visit there, but you really feel that you're viewing another world, another time, and it actually shows the idea about how plants, how ecosystems can survive, the implications there, you know, what is a living fossil, how resilient are they, and it sort of really, I think, highlights sort of the majesty and beauty of Gondwana, which is often overlooked. Mariana, you've had your hand up, and then Kat will come to you.
Yeah, just wanted, because I've been thinking about this when this panel was organized, about how this bias also steers the kind of research projects that we conduct, the kind of questions, the interpretations that we make on the knowledge and biodiversity. And this would be something also interesting for everyone to question and to realize and to start asking ourselves, how is my research tainted with this bias, whether you're from the global north or the global south? Because I don't think we realize how much our research is steered by these biases. I was just reflecting about that the past few days, and I think it would be important for everyone to start realizing about these biases that we have in science. It comes back to that thing that we started the panel discussing about objectivity, which is completely lacking, and neutrality, it's completely lacking in science.
And thanks, Mariana. And I think that's a really good question. There's actually a point here, and they did a paper late last year, Brown et al., when they looked at sort of size bias, and he actually talked about the very latest Cretaceous and how that is so heavily skewed by what's happening in North America, sort of Hell Creek and Lance formations, and how a lot of the interpretations and understanding has come from that region without understanding what's going on in other parts of the world, even though there's many other localities in India, South America, Mongolia, even the southern United States. And interestingly, a little bit of a tangent, but the recent Tyrannosaurus paper that's come out recently, and from my understanding, it doesn't necessarily go into the specimens found in the southern United States, and maybe those that go into Mexico. So that sort of has implications there. So, you know, it is really, really important to have that spread. Kat, thanks for your patience.
Oh, thank you for hosting this event. Wonderful way to start my morning. But I wanted to ask, as somebody who wants to get more into paleo art and is afraid of drawing backgrounds, where do I start with paleobotany? Because I am terrified of depicting backgrounds, because I'm very dinocentric. So obviously when I do my paleo art, I'd be putting grass. There was no grass in the Jurassic as far as I remember. So that's not good. I would love to know where to start with that.
Okay, before I let Joshua answer, I would say feel free to reach out to paleontologists, geologists. I think they're more than happy to help you, especially when people take an interest in their work, in their formations. We're more than we at Paleontologists Against Systemic Racism are more than happy to help you support depictions of the form of Gondwana in Eastern Eurasia. We have expertise from there. So my first point would be to ask the questions, reach out to paleobotanists around the world, reach out to paleobotanists. They, you know, many researchers are more than happy to discuss their work when people show a genuine interest. First, Joshua, then if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, so usually what I do in these cases, yes, if nothing else goes, absolutely reach out to paleobotanists. I mean, there are quite a few now on social media that are readily available. I think a few are in here, and otherwise, I usually I learned really to filter out the important information out of papers. So looking in the introduction parts, the geology parts, there's usually also often mention of the climate and sometimes also the flora. And from there you can go on. Also, when you just then look in the geology part, okay, what formation is this? You can sometimes find specific papers on the flora of these formations. and can then go from there. That is usually the way to go. And yeah, it is sometimes really tricky, also because of the inherent problems with paleobotany, that you have these form genera, and then you have the flowers, the stems, the leaves, all with different names, and what belongs to what. And all the paleobotanists are also like, this might belong to this, but maybe it's not. And it is a little bit messy, but usually there are people to help, and literature to find, and certain ways to get around paywalls too. So yeah.
Yes, yes, there are. But always contact researchers. They're more than happy to help. Avery, you have your hand up again, so go for it.
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to say, yeah, researchers are always happy to help, but also, I mean, if you're on social media, there's so many people who are always willing to collaborate with, with paleo artists, and that actually works out really well. And I forgot what the other point that I wanted to make about this was. Sorry, it's been a long day. I've been lecturing all day.
Fine.
So
No, it's very, yeah, don't worry. Don't worry. If you think about it, you can more than happy jump back in. Are there any other questions or points? Yes,
I don't have a question, but I have a point that I want to just jump Tito into this conversation, because he's doing a great job, for example, mixing entertainment with science communication about Gondwana. So he recently released a game, Dino Hazard, which is pretty much, it's okay, it's an RPG, you will have fun playing it, but it's about communicating about Brazilian organisms, plants, invertebrates, vertebrates of all types, and so on. And he's doing a great job, because, well, while kids and other people interested in the game are having fun playing the RPG, they are learning a lot of names from organisms from Brazil. And I was like delighted seeing the Paleo cast. What's the name? What's his name?
Marshall.
Yeah, David Marshall playing. And he was, okay, I'm gonna play, and I'm gonna, talk about all these organisms. And he was suddenly, I don't know any of them, and I'm shocked. And he was learning the names, and I was so delighted to see that, because, people don't know really what we are publishing from here. Sometimes things of the Global North are not really shared. People are more likely to share research published by, our Global North partners, or perhaps those research reach more closely this audience. And things that are published by us remain like something like reading. And it was delightful to see David Marshall learning about our organisms. And so I want to really highlight Tito's game. So if anyone is interested in learning about organisms, paleo organisms from Brazil, from the past, please do consider going on your Steam and buying Dino Hazard, because this is just awesome. And Tito, if you want to just talk about your game.
Thanks, Alini. Before I come back to that point, I'll let Deprivo go, because I know she has to go. So would you like to make your final? And thanks for attending. It's very, very, very much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you so much for, providing this platform. I really enjoyed the discussion. Unfortunately, it's quite late here. It's already 9:45, way past my bedtime in normal days. But it was really great to meet all of you and see some of the familiar faces. Hope to see you again soon. And hopefully we will meet in person sometime. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye. Have a good evening. Thanks a lot. And yes, there is plans. Hopefully one day we will be able to meet up in person. And on that point, I have played Dino Hazard. It's a great game. I definitely recommend it. And I love the fact it had Gondwana fauna. So the Brachiosaurids, it was just like really refreshing to have that diverse fauna. And there's also a book which is the beautiful map at the beginning. So for those who are familiar with Michael Crichton's The Lost World, there's a beautiful map. But again, it has gone on in fauna from the same ecology, and that was so refreshing to see that part of the world really being sort of brought to life. And you're like, wow, these are things I read about and wish I could show. And on that point, the Ubajara is part of a bigger project to show fauna and ecology of Eastern Eurasia and the former Gondwana. So do keep a lookout for that. So we are trying to communicate this science as a collective out there for everyone. Avery, sorry, you had your hand up.
Sorry, I just wanted to add to the point that I had forgotten. Particularly with Paleobotany and Paleo Art, it would be better if you were to look at scientific journals from the past 10 years and not beyond, because those are also filled with inaccuracies, because during that time, since there are not a lot of paleobotanists around the world, you find that people who were not paleobotanists were actually influential in the schematic drawings of those reconstructions of the plants during that time. So yeah, just something for you to know as a paleo artist if you are looking in scientific journals as references for plant reconstructions.
Thanks for that very, very useful information, and completely agree. Natalia, I know you had your hand up earlier. I don't know if you still want to make a point.
Yeah, it was about the Global South papers just going on the radar, despite having amazing science that's on the level of everything else. They sort of don't get the same engagement. I'm sort of wondering why that might be. Is it because it's much harder to publish in Nature or Science because it's expensive and it's lower, there's less PR rate and less prestige and to spread across the thing. But also many scientists from Global South might not tweet or post in English. And there's statistical studies showing that English posts get boosted up comparing to other languages, which is completely a shame. And it's also something we are doing currently. We are all speaking English, and we are showing lingua franca despite of English, despite talking about Global South, which doesn't have English as the main language in Latin America or most of Asia. So it's really, there's a lot of language barriers and things that just get in the way of showcasing its science and allowing people to be authentic. It's pushing something to fit mold that's already here, but you can't do it because to put it in a very Western, very English mold to stick in, and you cannot do it with the current infrastructure of websites, of publication. And yeah, how do we engage in something that, for example, making it more accessible in different language or on different territories, because not every country in the world uses Twitter, which is the main source of communication between scientists, if that's being in Global North or Global South or Global East and Global West. So how do we approach this? By approaching, but also not forcing people to speak English and engage in platforms we're currently engaging in, which are very, very West-centric.
I think that's an excellent point, excellent point in question. So Avery, I think you've had your hand up again.
I'll just touch a little bit on the question. Unfortunately, these biases exist worldwide. And you find this, especially at conferences, you see it a lot, particularly at conferences, where there are researchers from other, I would say, Global South or I'll say India, who are not that very well known, that have such a huge contribution to make in the field, but because they're not that well known, or they think their talk is not that important, people will not attend. And the bias as well that also comes in when you can't understand someone that's speaking English, when you call it fluently, people don't want to work with that. It's the assumption that speaking English is a prerequisite to better science, and that is absolutely not true. And I always, like, for example, when I go to conferences, you always see it. It's the subtle things that it's the entrenched bias of someone who is who doesn't speak English as a first language, and it just happens sometimes that people just decide that they're not going to do that. But at the same time, it's how the bias elevates when it's entrenched in research to actually think that people don't know more than someone from the global north in terms of research when they come from the global south. And I found this, like, especially when I read in these Western or global north journals, how they say this is the first time this has been addressed, or this is the first time to our knowledge that this has this. But I mean, you haven't done enough research to actually say that this is the first time this has been done, when you've excluded like a whole lot of literature that is not English based. And so that also contributes to how the bias that you already see. And what else was it? Sorry, my mind is just all over the place right now, but I'll come back again.
Thanks, Mariana.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Abiu just said, because I completely agree with what she was saying. And to answer to Natalia, I think everything that you said is part of the barriers that we have to deal with. So everything applies to why our work doesn't get published or doesn't get shared. Language barrier, gender bias, country of origin biases. There's a lot of biases that intersect. This is a very key concept that Cassius mentioned earlier, intersection, because all of these barriers just come together. There is not one that is more important than the other. They just all sum up and they create this bias that we just see in biases. And I think part of the solution, if we want to call it that, is whether, if you are from the global north especially, but when you act as a reviewer, when you are an editor, when you're writing your own papers, you need to make sure that you are citing a diversity of authors and not just the same 3 or 4 white men from the global north. And that's a way of really starting to push that bias and to have more representation in the articles. If you're organizing a conference, you need to make sure that you have gender balance, geographic representation balance. There are a lot of things that you can do, which are small steps, but they all add to our work being visible. It really happens to us here, for example. I work with fossil cetaceans, and my work doesn't get cited because simply I'm from Argentina. So it's not relevant. The only papers that matter are from the global north. And that keeps on adding to my work being invisible. So I think what we can do, everyone, but especially people from privileged positions, they can just take the time to make sure that you're being diverse in your papers, you're being diverse in your citations, you're being diverse in the reviewers that you propose, for example. You're being diverse when you are an editor of a journal and you need to look out for reviewers. You can take the time to do that and you can really make a difference there.
No, thanks, Mariana. No, that's a very, very, very poignant, very relevant point and solutions, and I do support them. And I think that's why at Paleontology and Systemic Racism, we are working together, so we will help support one another in various ways in terms of research, as well as generally making things more inclusive. And you aren't alone. We will support you and all of them. It's really important to cite one another, and it is great research, and there are all sorts of biases present. I am very aware of the time, and I think we could carry on going. So we will get through all these hands and any other questions. If any audience members do have any questions, please do raise your hands so we could start bringing the proceedings to the close, because we literally could do a whole conference, a week of conferences on these topics. It shows the importance of engagement, how relevant they are, but also it's been amazing to see how many people are willing to engage on these topics and what needs to be discussed. Alini, I know you had your hand up, so go for it.
Okay, I was going to say that Mariana just covered up most of my points, but there is a general perception, this is like something going on, that global south research is less of lower quality. That's not true at all. And I feel that also in international conferences, when people from the global south are speaking, people don't pay attention. I don't know why, but I always feel like that in international conferences. And books published by authors from the global north, they tend to less cite papers from the global south and authors from the global south. I'm really interested in knowing how much is, if this perception is right, because I have this feeling, but I want to know if this is right. So, for example, if it's really a thing that people from the global north tend to cite more their colleagues over our papers produced here in global south, that's a good question to investigate in paleo research, because I know this is true for other areas, but this is true for in paleo research, because really I think this is natural. We tend to share with others things that we agree with and things that from people that we know. So for example, if I know Natalia and I know she's a good researcher, I'll be willing to share and talk about her work. But if I don't know Avi, I'm most likely not talking about her work or sharing her work. So perhaps this is happening with people in global north. They tend to cite, they tend to share things of people they know. They meet in conferences, they meet in symposiums. So it's good that during this pandemic time, we were able to meet more people. And the second barrier that do exist, I really see that happening, is that the research produced in global south is usually seen as of less importance, of less impact, of lower quality, which is, again, not true. So this is systemic racism, right? Okay, thank you, Kat.
Thanks for that. That's very true, and I think there is a real issue there. And hopefully, together, collectively, we will make a change, and we will change that together. And we will change that by working together and showing that the science is amazing, and by doing mutually beneficial collaborations. Avery, you have your hand up, and then Rob will come to you next.
Yeah, I'd also like to add again to what Natalia was saying. One of the things that I have started doing is, particularly when it comes to papers that are in different languages that I don't understand, I either first contact the actual author if they are still, if they're still alive, or if they are willing to actually assist me, and then I move on. If I don't get help from the from the author or the co-authors, then I move on and I ask someone in science who is fluent in the language to actually assist me in translating some of the work. And that has helped me quite a lot in getting some of the information that I need for my work. I'll make a good example. I'm busy about to submit my PhD. And one of the original descriptions of the species that I'm working on is actually in French. And what happened was one person translated that particular description, and from there on it was used, not the original, but the translation was used as the standard, to reference the definition or the description of the species. Here comes a viewer looking at the species, and only to find that the translation they got the translation absolutely wrong, because I had to go and ask, a couple of people, not just one person to translate from French to English, but a couple of translations who are also scientists who got the exact same thing, So what I'm saying is, when you do need help with assistance in translating things or getting information that is not necessarily in English. And we know that the paper, is good, particularly like these old papers. You can collaborate with, a scientist or ask someone who's a scientist in that field to help you, translate and get the information. It might take like quite a lot, because I don't know if there is a repository out there that has a translation of, old papers or, papers that are not in English for specific fields. I don't know, but if there is, that would be actually a huge, helpful resource for all scientists to actually use, and for in terms of citations and referencing. So yeah, if you do have that information, please share.
Thanks a lot. That's very, very important points. Rob, are you there?
I am. Hi, folks. Thanks, Cass. I've been really quiet for the past few hours because it's been wonderful listening to everyone else. I am in a particularly privileged position of being working at Cambridge University and being on the council of Palas. And I'm going to use my Palas head just for a moment here to take your time and say that we are listening. The diversity group at Palas are working really, really hard. And we want to take in as much as we can from folks' comments. And I think there were 3 or 4 of us here at this talk here, and we're discussing at council. I don't look like I should be on council. Look at the skin here. It's amazing that I got on there. But this is a journal and association from the global north that you might assume is a really white, stuffy type of journal, but there's lots and lots of discussion going on there, and we're doing what we can, and we would like to do as much as we can and invite you to share as much as possible. I'm going to pop a link in the chat to the diversity pages on the Palas website, and invite you to contribute and share things that can help from that point of view. And that's all I want to say, because there's plenty more for you guys to say. And like I said, I'm at a very privileged position here, which is unusual for me, let's put it that way. So I'm going to use my time here to share this with you, and hopefully there can be some fruitful things coming from that. So I'll just put that in the chat now for you. Thanks, Cass.
Thanks a lot, Rob. And I was so happy when I found out you were on council. It was just like, wow, I was really happy. And also I will give a shout out to Palas, because they also have recently just closed their deadline just passed. I think it was 28th of February for their undergraduate sort of award for those from an underrepresented racial backgrounds. But again, this will be available in future, like next year, I believe. So do look out for that maybe later on this year, start applying early. So yes, Palas are also very active in diversity and trying to close this barrier, and they have been very engaging and very supportive of such work. So a big shout out to Palas, and thanks, Rob, for that insight. Are there any other questions, points before I close the session? Because it's been a very Joshua.
Quick thing just before we end this, in case somebody of you needs an illustration for a paper, and also their budget is very small for stuff like this, I'm absolutely willing to go down in my prices and so on. Although I don't have much time at the moment, but I think you see that all the time when a paper has some illustrations to go with it. It usually gets more media attention, and I think that's very important to get more awareness to, especially the ecosystems we currently are researching in the global south. And I'm very happy to help with that stuff.
No, thanks, and that's very much appreciated. And I'm sure our colleagues are also very appreciative of your offer, and it won't go unrewarded or unforgotten either. So thank you for that. And also Natalia has also offered to do that for academics on a budget as well. So shout out to her and thanks for that. Any other final points before I bring the meeting to a close? So thank you everyone for attending. It has been a very productive session. We've covered a lot of points, a lot of topics. We've barely touched on others. It clearly does show the range of topics, the range of experiences, the range of issues. However, it is very positive that people are willing to engage. We've had a huge amount of interest in the event, in the recording for the event for those who can't attend. We had an amazing sign up, and the event was only live for about 2 weeks as well. So it's very, very grateful to all of you taking your time out, attending, those who shared on social media. We at Paleontologists Against Systematic Racism are always willing to engage, set up collaborations with both researchers but also paleo artists as well. That is something that we have also included in our mission statement. So do please feel free to reach out. We're always willing to engage and seek allies and those who are willing to engage and help us, and willing to speak to different departments and other organizations to learn what they can do to help. So please do feel free to reach out to us. We also have the website just launched, so we will be sharing more content there, including articles about sort of decolonization of paleontology, historical issues as well, going forward. So thanks a lot for your time, and thank you everyone for attending. So
I just want to say that Ubirajara belongs to Brazil. Yes. That's it.
Yes. Can I just say thank you, Cass, for everything. Thank you for organizing. This has been very fruitful. You've brought a lot of people from different backgrounds together to contribute, to learn, and to share their experiences. Here's to many more. And thank you everyone for coming. And thank you, Cass. A huge, huge thank you to Cass.
Thanks a lot, you're most welcome. And yes, Ubirajara does belong to Brazil, and that will be going on our social media. So if you want to rewatch it, it will be available to rewatch it. And I have been listening to that a lot today. When I first got it, it is amazing, and it was just like, wow. But again, that was a world collaboration effort with paleo artists and scientists from all around the world. And it just shows what we can do together. And if we can get that science out to everyone and make people love science, then we've done our job, and we can make the world a better place. Because if kids want to go and learn science after watching that, I certainly would as a kid. So thanks again, everyone, and feel free to reach out anytime. Thanks.